Thanks everyone for having me. Hopefully you're having a great day, morning, evening, a late night, depending on what time zone you're in. I know there's a lot of different time zones. For me, it's right around noon because I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. A little bit about me. Name's Joe Guadagno. Uh, Most people call me that. Unless I'm in trouble, then I'm called something else. If you have any questions on the content, feel free to reach out to me at jguadagno at Hotmail, or I'm active on Twitter at jguadagno. You can find the code samples, which are really not meaningful in this case, since a lot of it will be walking through at my website at jjg.me/aboutjjg. And hopefully sooner or later, I will get back to streaming now that conference season is winding down for the year. So a little bit about me. I am a director of technology at Quicken Loans, hence the shirt right now. I organized a similar conference to this, when we had these in-person events called Desert Code Camp in Phoenix, Arizona. I am a developer services MVP. That just means that I do free training and free consultation for Microsoft and don't get paid for it. But the more important stat is I am a father of 2 and husband to 1. That being said, our agenda is mostly lots of debugging, and that's it. No more slides. So I am going to close out of this and let's get back into it. So we're going to kind of go through 2 examples or 2 sample applications to talk about debugging. The first one is a rather simple program. It has a class and just some instructions. But before we dive into that, let's go and look at some of the debug settings that we have available. If I go to settings in Rider and choose build, execute, and deployment, I'll see a debugger applet or debugger settings. There are a couple of different settings. We're not going to go through the data view, stepping, remote, and live edit. I'm actually not going to go through every one of these settings, just highlight some of them because everyone's preference is slightly different. Most of these are the default settings, meaning they're on when you install Rider. Sometimes I turn certain ones on, sometimes I turn them off, depending on whether or not I like them. So the basics is show debug window when we hit a breakpoint, and then focus the application on breakpoint. That means bring Rider to the forefront once we hit it. Hide the debug window when we end the process. For me, I prefer that one to be off because I want to see the output typically right afterwards. Most of the other things are more personal preference. I'm going to talk through this one a little bit. Edit during debug, which talks to how you can, this is only applicable for .NET and .NET Core, where if you enable this, you have the ability once you're debugging an app, which we'll walk through in a little bit, you have the ability to change the code and then have it automatically kind of refresh as you're doing it. So this is on by default. You can speed up your development a little bit by turning this off. The other thing that might be turned on or off for certain people is show return values. This is key, which we'll see in a little bit. This allows you to see the return values when you're debugging them. The debugger will go and execute the code on a separate thread and allow you to see the results coming back in. Flatten object hierarchy. This can be on or off, depends on whether or not you deal with objects on a regular basis, which in all honesty, most of us do. Cluster big arrays, this is another one. If you're doing a large record set, coming back with a large data set or an array of more than 100 characters, if you have cluster big arrays on, what that will do is kind of shrink down your result. Instead of seeing a list of, let's say, 15,000 items, it'll display it in chunks of 0 through 99, 100 through 199, etc. So that's good if you're looking through high value or high length scripts. And I'll show you some shortcuts around how to get away with that or get around that. Everything else is specific to types of development. So hot reload if you're zooming Xamarin Forms, if you want to change the default bugger, what the ports to look at, etc. Most of this other stuff I won't cover because it's a little bit more advanced. So let's get into our code base. So here we have a person class that has a couple of properties: first name, middle initial, last name, email, date of birth, children, and then this little bit here, which is just a function that will give me a full name. Essentially, it prints first name space last name unless there is a middle initial. Two other caveats while I'm presenting: there are two plugins that I have that are not built in out of the box. These plugins help me, one, for doing presentations, and then two, teach me keyboard shortcuts. So down right around here with our little logging colors, you might see a text in here. If I click a button, it's going to say, hey, you've clicked that button 17,000 times. You should use the shortcut Control-Alt-B or something like that. Also, right around here where it says terminal, there'll be a green box that will indicate the shortcut I pressed. Keep in mind, the shortcut I press or I say might be slightly different. That's because you can have your own keyboard mappings depending on what IDEs you're familiar with or what your likings are. This settings that I use the, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but the Visual Studio shortcuts. Because I came from Visual Studio development for a while, now I use Rider, but muscle memory is hard, so I keep those shortcuts there. Now let's look at the program itself. We're going to kind of list through iterating through this method called populate people, and then kind of do a couple things. Essentially, we get a list of people, we print out the people, we then look for the parents and end. So it's going to come through and see this list of people. Before we go that, I want to explain a little bit what debugging is for those of you that may not know. So I'm going to open up the Explorer for a second, and then I'm going to right-click and choose Show in Explorer. Because I'm in Windows, the way to view files is called Explorer. If you're in Rider on a Mac, this is going to say Reveal in Finder. I'm going to click Show in Explorer. You see here the Show in Explorer popped up. Now we're going to walk through this file folder. Now most of your code you'll notice is here. That doesn't exist. That doesn't differ from your Solution Explorer. But there are these two folders that not a lot of people know about: the bin and the OBJ file or folder. The OBJ is a throwback from the C++ days. When you're compiling or building your application, it generates what's called link libraries, which where the DLLs came from, dynamic link libraries. It builds up these object files. These object files are then combined into a DLL or an exe, etc. So it always has a separate directory for that. And then the bin or binary is where your application goes. And I say application on purpose because it could be an exe, it could be a NuGet package, could be a website, could be a DLL, could be a Node app. It really just depends. So we're going to look at this bin folder a little bit, and we'll see that there are two folders here: a debug folder and a release folder. The debug folder has the files needed for debugging your application. The release has files needed for when your application runs. The difference between the two is release is meant to be as optimized as possible. Your debug settings or debug file has a lot more in it to help you debug your application or help you kind of troubleshoot your app. So let's go and take a look at that debug folder. So I look about it, ignore the .NET 6.0. I have .NET 6.0 and it just creates a folder for that now. But you'll see I have two sets of files here: mastering debugging exe, mastering debugging exe.config, and mastering debugging.pdb. So the executable is just that. This is a console app, so it generates an exe on the Windows box. If you're using a Mac, it's going to look slightly different. This is the application configuration file, nothing different here. But here's a weird file, a PDB, which if I expand my types here, stands for Program Debug Database, or database, depending on how you say it. This file contains instructions on your debugging instance. So if you've ever built an ASP.NET app, or actually almost any app, if you get a critical error that's unhandled, you'll get an ASP. You used to get a yellow screen of death. Now you get a light white screen or blue screen that says, subject object null reference on line 67. You did this, this, this. Here's everything else that happened. That's all kind of stored in this PDB file. You'll then notice there's these two other sets of files, this vshost.exe and vshost.exe.manifest. This is actually what the debugger is running. It's attaching to this, which loads this file, which ultimately kind of sort of executes this file. And those are not as important, but I like to explain them so you know what you're doing or what the IDE is doing behind the scenes. And they're also important later on if we want to what's called attach to process, which we'll show you later on. So let's go to starting the app. The first thing with debugging an app is putting together a breakpoint. So I am going to throw a breakpoint right here. If I hover over line 11, just checking the chat to make sure that screen resolution is fine. It's gigantic on my screen. I'm going to put a breakpoint here. You'll notice that I get this little red circle. If I zoom in a little bit, oops, the zoom is not working. If I zoom in a little bit, this is a plus. Once I click on it, it's a solid red that says I'm going to break at this point. So what does that mean? When application is running and the IDE is attached to the application, so it's kind of babysitting what the application is doing. Once it hits this line of execution, the list of person, the variable name of people, populate people, it's going to break the app. Not break it as far as it's destroyed, it's no good. It's going to stop the application and bring back the IDE. So how do we get to that point? If we look within Rider, there are two buttons here, this run button or this debug button. Shortcuts are Alt F5 or F5 for them. You can also get them from the build and the run menu. So the build solution, the build menu has build solution, which is going to build everything in here, essentially compile it. There's a slight difference between build and rebuild. Build will only build anything that's changed since the last build. So if you have, let's say, 5 reference libraries, only 4 of them have changed, the 5th one is not going to be built unless you choose the rebuild solution. That's going to delete all the EXEs, DLLs, files, and build the solution. The clean solution does a little bit extra. It actually empties out your debug or release folder and starts from scratch. You'll see a couple other advanced options with Rider, and that gives me the ability to build or rebuild solution with diagnostics. This allows me to trace my application, see what's happening. You can build it without dependencies and or just the products. Now the run dialog has a lot more to it. So like I mentioned, you have those 2 buttons to run the app or debug the app. You can also start it in profiling mode, which in this case using sampling. So it's going to kind of occasionally ping your app to start collecting metrics like how long the populate people method takes, how long it takes to connect to the database, etc. I can then choose run or debug, which will pop up a window and let me choose. Here it's going to say I'm going to run the mastering debugging. I could choose attach to process, which I'll do right now just to show. And here's that little key promoter X, which tells me I should press Control-P to do that. So if I do this, I get a dialog box that appears that allows me to say, what do you want to attach the .NET Debugger to? And it's grouped in 4 groupings right now. .NET processes, so these are anything in .NET Framework. So apparently I am running 7 applications that are running with .NET, and the version of them is their x86 architecture or x64. I am running one .NET Core process, which is this Power Launcher, and then there are several Universal Windows platform processes running. Most of them are around, the shell, and then a lot of other apps that require elevation. These are applications that are typically C++ apps or another technology that's not listed in that previous list. These require elevation because of the way I have my machine set up. So you might have heard of, user access control. Because I have my user access control level set a little bit higher, I have to provide authentication, or I have to provide access to those. So I'm going to hit escape and get out of that because we're not going to debug any other processes. You have the same thing for remote processes. This is really helpful for, let's say you have your boss's administrative assistant is having trouble running her TPS report for Friday. Now you have 2 options. One of them is probably not likely. You can go home and say you'll deal with it on Monday, but your boss might not be happy. Or you can install Rider on her machine and figure out, because as we all know in software development, it always works on my machine, right? So you can use attached to remote process to connect to her machine or his machine and debug the process that's actually running, while the source code and Rider on your machine, you can connect there. Now there's some caveats to it. You need certain permissions on the machine as well as certain ports to be open. And you can do the same thing with profiling, so you can see why certain things are connected, and then do the same thing with the Unity process. So let's talk about this edit configurations. So if we look up here, we have 2 what are called solution configurations, debug and release. The difference between them mostly is whether or not you want to build them or they are deployable. In some cases, certain files go with them. You'll want to create different solution configurations for things like different application configurations. So an app settings.debug and app settings.production and so on. There's some other slight nuances to the difference. In most cases, most people have debug and release. For some of the projects I work on, I have 4 or 5 different configurations because I release to multiple environments. So let's get started and debug this. So I'm going to click this little debug right here, which is a bug. It should kind of be a squash bug, I think, but it's a little bit better than the other IDE's version of it. Once I do that, we have a window down here which starts to build. Once the build is done, I am presented with the debugger window. And let me get rid of view for right now because I don't want you showing. This debugger window has 3 different pieces to it. We have kind of the call stack here, which shows how your application is running. This will become a little bit clearer in the next part. Something called a local variables window, which we'll cover in a little bit, and then the watches and immediate. So if I want to continue with this, I have a couple different options. I can hit the play or resume button here. I know for me, coming from the Visual Studio world of things, I, even to this day, click this button so many times to resume the execution. It's just getting into muscle memory of clicking this or hitting F5 and not clicking this button. It's a hint for anyone watching this video that's on the Rider team. But we're going to kind of walk through some of these arrows, which you see are highlighted here. They're also available in the Run menu under debugging options. You'll see a lot of them kind of get lit up. So I'm going to walk you through what some of these are. So here we are getting into this populate person. So if I hit play, it's going to execute the next line, which is pretty much this function here, everything from lines 20 through 29, and then go to line 13, the for each. So you have a couple of different options to do that. There's step over, which if I execute this, is going to jump over. So it's going to execute everything within the populate people. So again, lines, 22 to 26. I can do force step over, which is going to make sure that everything executes and come down. Or I can do the step into, which says, well, I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen in the populate people. Well, let me go into that. And we're going to do that in 1 second. And then the smart step into, which is only good for smart people. No, it's really just for intelligently we'll go through and look for any areas where the data might change. So it tries to be smart enough to break where it needs to be. So what that will do, if I click the smart to, it's going to return to here as opposed to do static, then line 24, then here. So let's go here and click this, or a shortcut of F11, which you see down here, it stops off at the next line. You'll notice a couple of other things that appear. I got this little orangish arrow, which says drag to skip code. I'll talk about in a second. We have that skip to here. This comes on any line. So any line that's actually executable, I can do that. And we're not going to skip to here yet. So I realized, oh, this is a simple function. It just has, it's creating 4 instances of a variable. I'm good. I'm going to do what's called step out now. And that's going to execute the code and then go back up here. So it says, okay, you're done. Go back out. Let's move forward to the next line. So I'm going to hit, what do I want to do here? Step over, F10, or function F10. That's my keyboard. Now I execute that code, and you'll see I have, if I hover over, a person count here. So I have a count of 4. Rider is smart enough to kind of figure out based on the variable what we should display. So here it's saying you're in a list. Most likely you want to see how many are here. I'm going to display 4 for you. Over here I got this little data tip which tells me the thread that the ID is running on. This is helpful if you're in the previous talk when you're looking at asynchronous programming. If you have multiple threads running, it's helpful to know where it's there. And that's not really a squiggly line, that's more of a thread, which I just realized was the actual idea for the icon. If I click on this little plus, I can see a list of the people, and this being C#, it's a 0-based array, so I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can open up any one of them and see that for person 1, for person 0, it's myself with my email address and my date of birth, and then I can navigate through that also. That being said, I realized, oh, there's something wrong with the people. I really should have had more. So I want to re-execute this line. So let me go all the way up here, and I can click and drag this guy back up to here. You can also right-click and choose skip to here, which will take you back up to that item. Now, if I run function F10 again, it's going to go through that and re-execute it. Remember, one thing to note, if you are doing this, that re-executes everything. So if this was populate people and it was pulling in from a database or calling an API, it's going to go out and recall that API. If this was a save people method and that went and updated the database, it's going to re-update the database. So keep in mind when you're using that. You also notice here that my populate people turned yellow. That indicates that this value changed, and it was a result of me skipping the code back. There's one other thing I want to show. So let's go skip back here, and then we're going to go step into the function. So let's step into, step over. You'll notice here in the call stack, now I have two options. So now we're outside of the submain. I'm in the populate people. If I click on this submain, Rider brings me back to here, and it's highlighted to green saying this was the line of code that called into the populate people method. So I'm just going to do step over to let these return and come back. You'll also notice that there's a little skip over here. If I click on this, let's say done, because I'm done with debugging, I can do this skip to here. That skip literally skips that. So you'll notice if I go to the console, there is nothing written here, and it should have wrote out the person full name times 4 and these other stats. That literally says don't execute any code. So in this case, it didn't execute anything from lines 13 through 20. If I hit the resume, it's going to output done, and we are done. So that's kind of cool. Let's run the app one more time and see if we have any other issues. So I am going to put a breakpoint here because I noticed that there is a problem entry in, actually, let's run the app first before I come and say that. So I put a breakpoint here so that it can stop there and we can see the code, but we actually don't even need to do that. I can right click here and choose run to here, and it's going to execute all the lines up to that point. So if I go to my console, it says that I have Joseph Guadagno, Deirdre A. Guadagno, my wife, and my 2 kids, Joseph and Emily. But the number of parents is 1. Now, in my particular case, that's not true. It should be my wife and I both have kids. So I know that there is a problem. So let's go and figure out how we can fix that problem. I'm going to press enter, and that brings us to this line of code, which I will hit resume, and we are good. So let's do a breakpoint here and see what's happening. So I'm going to hit this, and let's uncomment that because we don't need it anymore, but I might want that in the future. So I'm going to go and add that back, and I'm going to right click on it and choose this enable and mark it as not enabled. So you notice now that just did a circle with it. That says, hey, I got this breakpoint that you've used in the past, but you don't want to use it right now. So if I click debug, I'm going to go and skip to line 15. It's going to go and execute, populate the people variable, and then go through each person. So let's go hit here. And now I'm here at the person. So I'm going to go look at the person and see everything that's there. So I look at the person and I see that there's a child count of 1. So that's good. But I notice that this is the problem. I'm seeing that one of the parents doesn't have a problem, doesn't have a count. So I am going to, I can flag this property. And what that does is kind of put it up here to save. Or I can right click and choose add to watches. So now over here, I am watching what's happening with that child property. So right now it says mastering debugging.person because that's the object. The variable is person, and we're looking at the children property, which is a list of person, count of 1 in my case. And let me move this over a little bit more so we can see the whole thing. So I'm going to hit play again and watch. And now the person is null. I'm like, oh, why is that person null? So let me go and find the person. Here it says person equals person, which is really not that helpful, but it doesn't know what to display. So let's help it with what to display. Click on this little drop down and see the person object. And I want it to display the full name. So I'm going to click on this little property here, which turns into a flag. And then now whenever a person is referenced, Rider is going to show the full name of that person because that's the property I chose. So if I click on this, I'll be able to see full name is now up to the top, and you can add multiple properties to it if you want. Typically, I only have one. So now I see the problem is my wife, she doesn't have any kids. And I know if you're anything like me, I've been a parent for 25 years. Sometimes you kind of wish that they weren't around. But in this case, we want our kids around. So let's see what we can do to fix that. So I'm going to go to person, open it up, and look at the child or the children property. And I see it's null. I want to fix this to see if the rest of my logic is null, is going to change. Now, there are a couple different ways that you can fix this. The first is, why is it not working? There should be a set value right here, but it's not available in this dialog box. So I am going to hit the set value. That gives me the ability to create a new child. So I'm going to do person and then set it to first name equals, IntelliSense is getting in my way. And I'm going to get a failure for that because that was not legible. So let's do that again and do new person. And then do first name equals to JJ. If I hit enter on here, it's going to create a new person. So now you see that there is a person here with the full name of JJ, and it updated everywhere. The watch we had now changed to a full person. You get this little message that implicit evaluation is disabled because we updated it here. So let's go and check out the next bit. So we are going to run to here because I don't want to skip anymore. So let's run to here. I should do run to here nonstop. What that did was skip all the other breakpoints and had us run to this point. So I could do Control F9. Now I'm looking at this statement and I'm getting a parent count where I'm doing two different link statements. A where clause to look for last name of Guadagno. If we looked at the list, they were all last name of Guadagno. This was just for ease of presenting. I'm guessing you wouldn't want to just see the parents that do that. Now we see a count of the children equals null. What if I wanted to see just the results of this first where clause? So you can do that. Now, your keyboard shortcut might vary, but on my Windows machine and the Mac, I can hold the Option key and then click on it. That's going to do is that's going to execute that line of code. It's saying, hey, for the people.where, where you're calling p lambda p.last name equals Guadagno, it's going to return an enumerable. If I go and click on the results, I am going to see a list of all 4 people, which is cool. And I can do that on the count too by holding down the Alt key or Option key and see that I returns 2. So now I fixed my bug. That's awesome. I really didn't fix it. I just modified the data, but at least I know if the array is populated, it will be covered. So that's cool. Let's see how we can execute that in the past. So we've got these 2 breakpoints here. I'm going to stop the program because it's going to run its normal course. Let's say I go here and create a new child. Those of you that are mothers and or fathers, you're probably wishing it was easy as this to create a new person. But that's not the case for here. Let's do first name equals AJ. And then what am I missing? That. And then one more curly brace. Nope. Don't do list of person. And then here, sorry, that's why you try to avoid live typing code. New person. There we go. Now that should be good. Now, I don't want to remove those breakpoints, and I really don't feel like disabling them. So I can right-click here and choose Start Debugging and Run to Here, or Start Debugging and Run to Here nonstop. Now, the two differences between them is Start Debugging and Run to Here will implement or break at any breakpoint. So in our particular case, it's going to stop at line 15. That has the breakpoint, but I want to skip those for now. I just want to see if my logic is right. So I'm going to do Start Debugging and Run to Here nonstop. You notice I didn't have to put a breakpoint. I can just do that. The IDE is smart enough to execute it and add a breakpoint behind the scenes. So if we look at our console app, which by the way has this little yellow arrow to say, hey, something's changed in here. I look to see I have my myself, my wife, my son, and my daughter. So that's awesome. If I look here, I can already see that parent count equals 2, so that's going to output everything. Everything is hunky-dory. So let's go and stop the app. Remember, if one thing to note, if you hit stop like I did, be very careful of garbage collection. You know, if you have open connections to databases or other resources, they can tend to hang around by you doing that. So just something to be careful of. Let's say for some strange reason, I've gotten my daughter's birthday wrong, which apparently here I did because I gave her the same birthday as me, and that's not her true birthday. So how can I take a look at that? I don't want to navigate through all 4 people in this list. Let's just say you had thousands. There's a couple of different things you can do. So if you right click and choose on it or do Control-Alt-B, you can see the breakpoint dialog. And excuse me for the size of it. It varies based on resolution, and I normally don't code at this resolution. So here you get the breakpoint dialog, which has 3 categories. .NET line breakpoints, which has everything within your .NET code, any CLR exceptions. You can do certain things if you have certain certain exceptions that get thrown, like here, an argument null exception. Or if you're debugging an HTML app, here you can check for JavaScript. So right now we're on line 15. Now I can do a couple of different things. I can say hit count equals to 4 because I know Emily is the 4th person in here. So this breakpoint will only hit when we get to the 4th record. But in the event Emily is no longer the 4th person, what if the database came back in a different order? We were using asynchronous and the order of the results is not guaranteed. We can do something called a condition. So the condition allows you to put in a C# in this case, or a VB syntax where you can indicate what you want. So you still get full intelligence. So I'm going to say person.first name equals Guadagno. And then what do I want to do with that? I can still do the enabled. I can still do suspense or suspend execute. I can do log a message that says breakpoint hit, show me the stack trace. I can evaluate log, so I can log her first name. I can remove it. There's lots more. For most people, the condition is enough. So I'm going to do that. If we notice here now under my debugging icon, I have a little question mark. Not that it's I don't know, but it's I have a condition. So if I run this program now, when we look at the console, we should see just Joseph, Deirdre, and Joseph again. So if I pray to the demo gods correctly, it should work as intended. And no, it didn't. What did I do wrong? I missed something. That's what I said. If I pray to the demo gods, let's check to, oh, I have the wrong condition. There is no first name with Guadagno. It should be first name of Emily. Let's do that and rerun it. Now it should only show 3 and breakpoint. So it popped up. You see Joseph, Deirdre, and Joseph are there. And now we're up at Emily. I can go and view the person and find out, oh yeah, I have her date of birth wrong. It's really, let's hit F2. So function F2, it's really 11/1999. And I hit enter and it goes. Unfortunately, I hit enter twice and I didn't put it in a real date-time format, which is why you're getting the message. But that's the gist of it. While we're doing debugging, let's go into that one more time. Let's say you don't want to display this full name, Emily E. Guadagno. Well, luckily, there's an attribute that you can do where you can provide those tips to your, if you're a library author, you can override what Rider shows for that person attribute. So let's go and do that. I'm going to stop and I am going to go to the person. Now, within the system.diagnostic namespace, there are a couple of attributes. The one we're going to use right now is this debugger display. And the name is kind of self-explanatory. When we're in the debugger, I want you to display this. So what this does, this uses string interpolation, and you can kind of put in the values here. So I am saying I want you to display full name, comma, the string DOB space, time space, and then take the date of birth dot month, or sorry, dot minute, and then the number of children they have. So if I hit debug on here, and we hit the breakpoint on, it should be still Emily because I didn't change the condition, we will see that it just says full name. Why does it do that? It's not in this particular case because Joe doesn't know what he's doing. It's because Rider is using the flagged property. So if I don't have this flag property set, it's going to say this is the new item. So it's Emily E. Guadagno, date of time is 0, number of children equals exception of type, system null reference exception was thrown. That's kind of useless, but it goes to my point, or one of my points I want to make is whatever you put in that attribute won't affect your application from an exception standpoint. So in this particular case, with that record, Emily has no children. It was null. And if we looked at this, I was assuming that there was a property here. Now I can put in if children not null, blah, blah, blah. But for this particular case, I wanted to use the example. So if you notice, I keep showing the date of birth, and I probably don't want that property to be exposed regularly. What if it's an auth token or something like that? So I can go and hide that by doing this, debugger browsable state equals never. Now there are 3 different options for this. There's dot collapse, which means it shows it in a collapse view. Never means never do it. And root, it's hidden on the main property until you open it up. So I'm going to choose never and run this. It doesn't mean the property is not available to you. It means that the debugger is not going to show that. So let's take a look at what that means. So if I go here and take a look at Emily's birthday, I kind of have to scroll over because I went too far. Actually, let's just look at Emily's birthday here in the watch window. And let's make this a little bit bigger. Hey, come on. I can see that her birthday is no longer here, but if I want to see her birthday, I can go to what's called the immediate window or click on this person right here and then do person dot date of birth. It's still there and still available, so I can hit enter and see it. I could also change any of the variables from here, so I don't really call Emily Emily by her full name unless she's in trouble. So I call her by her true first name, which is her nickname of Stinky, because she has really smelly feet. So now once I do that, you'll notice she changed yellow here because her first name property changed to Stinky. This went here because her first name changed to Stinky, the full name property added up. So we were able to go and look at values, change the values all across the board. So that's kind of cool with that. I think I covered everything. Oh, there's one other way that you can go and change expressions, and you can do that via this calculator to evaluate expressions. So you can do something like person dot first name, hit enter, it appears. I can click on this view and I'll see it in the text box. This is really smart because it will show you a item based on what the type of object is. So if I go to, well, they're all strings here, but if I had a JSON field, it would show me a collapsible view of JSON, and then I can go and see the history. If I need more lines, I can do this and open it up. So you can post any items in here. You can do that here in this code fragment window or here in the immediate window. That's one more thing here. If you want to get the shortcut to the breakpoints, you can go here. You could mute or disable all breakpoints by clicking this, and that's going to disable them all. And that does it for the life of your project. So that's it with this project. Let's step aside to a quote unquote more real world application. So here I have an app that is a API and a web app. Now in previous days, I would go click here, start off my web API app. Once that starts, go to my web UI app. And it started on another screen, so I'm just going to pull that here, go to my web UI, hit debug, and go. And that's kind of a pain because you have to remember which ones to do. Luckily, Rider has the ability to edit these configuration files. So let's minimize you for a second, and I'm going to stop all or shift F5 and have keyboard key promoter mention to me that I missed it 183 times. So let's go to edit configurations. Now you notice I get 4 configurations in here, which match that drop-down list. My context API, context web UI, and then context API IIS and web UI IIS. If I click on this plus button, I'm going to see there's a lot more that I can do. So I can do projects, I can do .NET static methods, I can start Azure function hosts, monorepos, universal windows, the list goes on, Node apps, React Native, etc. I'm going to look for something called compound script. So I'm going to choose compound, and then it's going to say, okay, what do you want to call it? So I'm going to do run web UI. And because I practiced this demo last night, these two were automatically in there, but I can hit plus and add in any. It's going to look at your existing configuration and say, which files do you want in there? So I did that, hit OK. Now it's defaulted here as web UI. I'm going to click play on this, and then both of those apps should start up. The contact viewer started and the web API started, so I don't have to do anything to that. You can do so much more with just that dialog box itself. Like if there's some precursor SQL scripts you want to run, there is a add database scripts. You can build Docker containers. You can run a series of HTTP commands. There's a lot you can do. You can also have unit tests. This particular project, I have unit tests. But actually, before we go to that, once you have those, you'll notice I actually have 2 debug windows open, one for the console, or sorry, one for the web UI and one for the context UI. if I go with unit tests, now I see I have the unit test available. Once I do a drop down, I now have the ability to start or run or debug the unit test right from here. That is all I have for now. So I will open it up to any questions or heckling from my two favorite developer evangelists, Rachel and Cody. This is where, oh snap, I have food in my mouth or drinks. I'm not ready to come back on screen.
No, actually,
they're muted.
Am I still muted? Can you hear me?
Oh, we could hear you. Yeah, I was like I was snacking and tweeting, I have to admit. It's getting late here.
You guys heckling me.
No, I was gonna say
I muted my desktop.
Oh, okay. So he can't hear us.
I went to presentation mode. I didn't want the noise.
I got you. So you can hear us now, right, Joe?
Yep, I can hear you now.
I was gonna say I heard 1,000 teenage girls scream in embarrassment when you called your daughter stinky. Dad, what are you doing?
Most of her friends know I call her that anyway. It's actually, I did that once and everyone was like, oh my God, you called her stinky? It's like, yeah, she knows it. It's like, yeah, I'm proud of that name. I did this talk once in Bulgaria and I was going through the children part of it and, where it says child equals 1. I was like, I've only been away for a week in Bulgaria. What did my wife do with one of the kids? And that joke went over equally as well. It's awesome.
Well, I'm not going to lie to you. When you were like, oh, parents count was 1, I was like, oh, this talk is about to get dark. But thankfully, it was just
yeah.
I had to reassure Khalid on the back channel that Dee is still alive and well. So we're fine.
She's in the other room right now selling her parents' house. So she is still alive and functioning.
Okay, that's good to hear. Actually, this is a side question for you. What theme were you using in Rider? Because it had a very synthwave, retro wave kind of color scheme.
I believe I am using a modified. I was using Dracula for a bit, and then I moved over to Resharper Dark. But I think the key is the Fira code, which is the enabled font, which kind of helps. I have noticed that the color scheme changes a little bit between dark and when I open it up in Mac versus Windows, there's a synchronization issue, which I already opened a issue for where the colors kind of get tweaked.
I was really hoping with that background that you would have said something like Dark Aqua or as the theme name, but what are you going to do?
I have tried, it actually looks like I've tried dark as well as melon, but the melon is more of an aqua. It's too laid back for me.
Yeah, and I just want to make a note. You said if you're allowed to mention Visual Studio and Visual Studio Keymap, we're not the Keymap police. We actually have support for keymaps like Emacs, Visual Studio, IntelliJ, Sublime Text, and VS Code. So
there are a bunch in here. Actually, it's right there, Keymap.
Yeah, so we welcome all users, and we respect your choice of tooling. Yeah. So no judgment on our part. Use what you like, is what we say here. So
yeah, we're all about the informative topics and education more so than the products. Even though we would love if people used all of our products, they don't always, and we understand that happens.
Yep. I guess a question for you from one of our watchers was, what's your favorite debugger feature? You kind of went through a lot. I definitely learned something from you as well, even being a developer advocate. But what's your number one feature that you think you can't live without?
So up until I started using Rider regularly, my favorite was the debugger display attribute, because that's not something out of the box like with other products like Visual Studio Code. You actually have to explicitly put that there, but having your code show you the return values instead of dropping into the watch window or the immediate window. See the things that you want. Saves those extra clicks or typing. I think that's the biggest, those data tips as they're called.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite debugger feature? Am I putting you on?
Is this where I'm supposed to say, I write perfect code. I don't need the debugger. We were having a discussion about this before. I had a manager way back that used to actually say and believe that. And it's just, your code sucks, actually. So I like the quick little things, quite frankly, where you just get to hover over a variable when you're sitting at a breakpoint, and you get to see all of the metadata, either just kind of inline on the editor face or by hovering. So that kind of stuff, just to get that quick glance, to see what's going on. I kind of like that. Is the most useful for me. So Joe, how many of these features would you say you use every day? Do you use the bulk of them? Is there a couple that you, like, favorite aside, is there a couple that you end up having to use, whether they're your favorite or not, a little bit more than the others?
So I think the watch window and the immediate window are probably my first go-tos. But in all honesty, one of the features I just discovered while I was preparing for this talk was the breakpoint scopes, which I actually didn't show that you can see the breakpoint scopes, but the ability to click Alt or press Alt and keystroke to something really stood out for me as one of the biggest features that I probably won't be able to live without going forward.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite features, it's relatively new to Rider users, but the immediate window, if you actually declare a variable in there, it automatically gets added to your watch variables. So you can keep track of variables that you're creating in the immediate window, which is really, really helpful. I think is super awesome. So Machis is saying his smart step into and pin to top are his big ones. So
yeah, I just discovered that in the last 2 weeks. So
I also enjoy like the thread view and digging into the threads, even when I just don't even actually need it for stuff. Like you're debugging a basic, form server data. I don't need any of the deep threading stuff. You do on certain projects, but not something like that. But I don't care. I got to go look in there anyway. It's just fun. So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, I know the debugger is probably one of those things when people are moving maybe from Visual Studio to Rider. It's probably the most jarring difference. Although I personally have grown to love and prefer the Rider debugger. It definitely takes some getting used to because it's really powerful, but it has a different, say, design language and vocabulary. So
it definitely does, and that was truly one of my hardest things to move over outside of the keyboard mapping, which I kept it the same, but just knowing where everything is. But at the same time, it adds some additional power, like the run to here nonstop, things like that kind of set it apart.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of started showing run configurations, and I think for me, that's one of the coolest features of Rider, especially if you have polyglot solution or team that's maybe building a UI with Vue for a front end or React that's completely separate from, say, a backend API project. You can just kind of link those two different ecosystems together and run them as a solution. So I think that's super cool. Yeah. So I'm not really seeing any more questions. Rachel, do you have any more questions?
That means I did such a great job.
You did.
I think Joe covered everything, and there wasn't a whole lot of questions because he covered everything. So I think we're kind of good here. I think any that were asked, we brought into the stream.
So, Joe, I know you Twitch stream. Do you want to promote your Twitch channel while we have you here? I think that's probably a good place where folks can kind of...
Sure. If you go to jjg.me/stream, That's an easy way to get to it, or I can share my.
Yeah, if you want to drop that link in the YouTube chat, we can share that with our audience. I know Joe does weekly Twitch streams, and they're fun to watch. So.
Yep, in most cases, you can just find me by my handle, Guadagno. That's what it is on Twitch and pretty much everything except for Facebook. That was late in the game.
Martin got your link in the stream.
Thanks, Martin.
So, yeah. Thanks, Joe. We really appreciate it. That was a great talk, and
Awesome.
I know our viewers enjoyed it as well. So
thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Good day, evening, morning, afternoon, depending on where you are. I know for you, Rachel, it's super late.
Kind of like morning, afternoon, and evening. Got like multiple. We got like at least 12 time zones going here.
Yep.
So.
All right. Thank you, Joe. We'll see you next time.